ready, and action! Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. Time for another brilliant lecture with your super host, Professor Victor Singingeagle here at Sisseton, Wahpeton College and lovely, bustling, crowded downtown Agency Village, South Dakota. And now, without any further dippity-doo, gobbledygook, or yakety-yak, the man himself, Professor Victor Singingeagle. Yay! Right on. All right. Now, when we were last talking, we were talking about some stuff from Zitkala-Ša, were we not? And I promised I was going to share with you some of her writing, which I pointed out can... dumb computers. Let's do it the old-fashioned way. Smart boards are not always as smart as you want them to be. There it is! It's called American Indian Stories. It appears on Internet Archive. We're going to go to the cover of the book, boop, and open it up. American Indian Stories by Zitkala-Ša, otherwise known as Gertrude Simmons Bonin or something like that. Bonin? Maybe it's French. Let's make it bigger. There is no great, there is no small in the mind that causeth all. Ooh, isn't that lovely? I want to share with you some of her work, Big Red Apples. I summarized a little bit for you before, and I might have even read an itty bit, but I'm going to share some more. You ready? Here we go. Page 34, was it? Darn it. 39 to 45. So we're going to go boom, 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 boom. I should have prepared this already, but I wanted to show you how this actually works. See, you can actually flip the book virtually. Did I go too far? I'm so busy talking. There it is. Let's shrink this out a little bit. And no, it's not going to let me. Oh, stop doing that. There we go. So, Mother sat in a chair, and I was hanging on her knee. Within the last 2 seasons, my big brother, Dawi, had returned from a 3 years education in the East, and his coming back influenced my mother to take a farther step from her native way of living. First, it was a change from the buffalo skin to the white man's canvas that covered our wigwam. Now she had given up her wigwam of slender poles to live a foreigner in a home of clumsy logs. Now remember what I told you before. This is a story of old time, about 100 years, maybe 200 years ago. And they're living in a teepee village, and the newcomers have come along and tried to civilize the Indians. And this little girl, who is Zitkala-Ša, she's living with her mom, and she's telling the story about this cultural change and how the newcomers came along and they hoodwinked her into going to a boarding school. Now, if you've followed along on e-learning, you also know that I have posted a video called Where the Spirit Lives. Let's pull it up for you. I'm not going to play it. I just want to show you. Oop, went too fast. Slow down, boy. There it is. Where the Spirit Lives. It says, beloved fellow scholars, Eureka, I found it. This is a movie that was made in the 1990s up in Canada, southern Alberta, to be exact, where there were a bunch of Blackfeet kids, also called Kainai. I think it's pronounced Kainai. Blackfoot. They're living happily, and the colonists, whatever you want to call them, come along and kidnap a bunch of kids and move them to the res, and the resulting cultural change. Again and again in the early native literature, these first generation writers, you're going to see that. So let's go back. The kids are happy. The little girl is living with mom, and we witness this cultural change and how she's changing. Let's see. The mom is still a little bit, what can we say? Untrusting? That's a good word. Yeah, let's say that. Untrusting of these newcomers. They call them pale faces in the book. Let's read. Yes, my child, several others besides Judewin are going away with the pale faces. Your brother said the missionaries had inquired about his little sister, she said, watching my face very closely. My heart thumped so hard against my breast I wondered if she could hear it. Did he tell them to take me, mother? I asked, fearing lest Dawi had forbidden the pale faces to see me, that my hope of going to the wonderland would be entirely blighted. With a sad, slow smile, she answered, There. I knew you were wishing to go, because Judewin has filled your ears with a white man's lies. Don't believe a word they say. Their words are sweet, but, my child, their deeds are bitter. You will cry for me, but they will not even soothe you. Stay with me, my little one. Your brother Dawi says that going east, away from your mother, is too hard an experience for his baby sister. So we're going to keep rolling. Keep in mind, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just trying to put salt in your oats to interest you to read this. Let's go back to the lesson plan. So, the land of the big red apples is what she calls the area where the school is, where the kids are being rounded up. Mother, ask them if little girls may have their red apples, when all the red apples they want when they go east. So yeah, they're telling them, these kids, enticing these little kids, you can eat all these big, wonderful, delicious, sweet red apples. And that's one way they hoodwink the little kids into going. And the little girl is excited. But mom is warning her, no. Look what happened to your brother. Now, let's keep rolling. They finally, somehow, she convinces her mom to let her go. So she goes. And now we get to the part of haircut, which appears on page 54 to 56. Let's roll over. 54 to 56. Oops. All right, I'm going to do it this way then. Oh. Slow down. There it is. 54. Now, the little girl has been taken away from mom. She's ridden in a train with a bunch of other little Indian kids, and they're all being marched in, and it's her first day, and she's scared, and they make her sit at a big old table with a bunch of other little kids, and she's learning that this is the chow hall, or the place where all the kids have to eat, the cafeteria, and they're not allowed to eat until they finish ringing a certain bell, and then they all can sit down. So we know this. And they say their prayers, and they sit. And Judewin says, oh, you're going to get your hair cut now. And the little girl's like, no, I don't want my hair cut. Let's see what it says here. Judewin says, we have to submit because they are strong, talking about the teachers at the school. No, I will not submit. I will struggle first, I answered. I watched my chance. And when no one noticed, I disappeared. I crept up the stairs as quietly as I could with my squeaking shoes, because they took off her moccasins. My moccasins had been exchanged for shoes. Along the hall I passed without knowing whither I was going. Turning aside to an open door, I found a large room with 3 white beds in it. The windows were covered with dark green curtains, which made the room very dim. So she's hiding. She hides under the bed. I'm going to keep going a little faster. And they're looking for her because she's got to get her hair cut. And they find her. I cried aloud, shaking my head all the while, until I felt the cold. They sit her down. They attach her or tie her to a chair, until I felt the cold blades of the scissors against my neck, and I heard them gnaw off one of my thick gray braids. Then I lost my spirit. Isn't that depressing? Reminds me of Catholic school. I got to stop with all this me stuff. Let's keep rolling. Now, mother's displeasure.
The little girl has gone to school for a while, and they've kind of beaten out a lot of the Indian girl in her. And she gets to go home to see mom, or maybe mom comes to visit. This is pages 75 to 76. Let's see. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. I went too fast. 74. 75. There we go. Incurring my mother's displeasure. In the second journey to the east, I had not come without some precautions. I had a secret interview with one of our best medicine men, and when I left his wigwam, I carried securely in my sleeve a tiny bunch of magic roots. It should be sacred roots, but she has to use the language of the times. This possession assured me of friends wherever I should go, so I absolutely did believe in its charms, that I wore it through all the school routine for more than a year. Then, before I lost my faith in the dead roots, I lost my little buckskin bag containing all my good luck. Nowadays we call that medicine bag. Let's keep rolling. So, she writes home, and she's also talking. It says that I had written for her approval. That's probably her mom. In 3 years, owner of my first diploma. Oh, that's right. She had already gotten her diploma, and she had written to her mom for her approval, but in her reply, I found no encouragement. She called my notice to her neighbors' children who had completed their education in 3 years. They had returned to their houses, or to their homes, and they were then talking English with the frontier settlers. Her few words hinted that I had better give up my slow attempt to learn the white man's ways and be content to roam over the prairies and find my living upon wild roots. I silenced her by deliberate disobedience. So there's a little bit of a struggle going on, and you're going to see this again and again in a lot of native writings and a lot of native stories where the kid is taken off the res and turned into something that they're not, and then they go home alienated from their family, their own culture, and even themselves. We're going to go faster because I'm going to stand up here and over lecture this. Let's roll, 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 roll. Indian teacher, pages 88 to 89. Let's move faster. 84 and 5, 8. There we go. A trip westward. One sultry month, I sat at a desk heaped up with work. She's a teacher now, okay? I'd gone through and fro, room to office, in an unhappy silence. I was watched by those around me, because remember, this is an Indian girl, and she's hanging out with non-Indians, and everybody's watching her. That's what happens. Never mind, I'm going to stand up here and start preaching. Let's see. For half an hour, I listened to his words. Who's she talking about? I'm going too fast. The superintendent. I was summoned to the superintendent's office for half an hour. I listened to his words, and when I turned to my room, I remembered one sentence above the rest. It was this: I am going to turn you loose to pasture. He was sending me west to gather Indian pupils for the school, and this was his way of expressing it. So he wants this Indian girl to go forth and make washichu out of others. I could go on, but I just wanted to share that with you. The other part I want to share you is pagan. This is where she starts to call herself a pagan. My challenge question to you is, why is she calling herself pagan? And does she really believe it? Page 106. One more. There we go. Let me see if I can find it. Why I am a pagan. That's the section. So now she's teaching these little kids. She says their quaint, round faces of varied hue convince the heart which leaps with glad surprise that they too are living symbols of omnipotent thought. With a child's eager eye, I drink in the myriad star shapes wrought in luxuriant color upon the green. Beautiful is the essence they embody. I leave them nodding in the breeze, but take along with me their impress upon my heart. Or take along with me their impress upon my heart. I pause to rest upon a rock embedded in the side of a foothill, facing the low river bottom. Here the stone boy, of whom the American Aborigine tells, frolics about, shooting his baby arrows and shouting aloud with glee at tiny shafts of lightning that flash from the flying arrow beaks. She's returning to her own culture in some ways, even though she's supposed to be a teacher and she's supposed to be teaching little kids. She comes back and she says, you know what? They think they got me, but maybe they don't. Because here's why I still love my culture. That says 102. I'm supposed to be going to 106, right? So, I want you to read this. There is one God who gives reward or punishment to the race of dead men. In the upper region of the Christian dead are gathered in uncasing song and prayer, and deep pit below sinful ones dance in torturing flames. Then she talks about all the beauty of her own culture. The little incident recalled to mind the copy of missionary paper brought to notice a few days ago, in which a Christian pugilist commented upon a recent article of mine, grossly perverting the spirit of my pen. Still, I would not forget that the pale-faced missionary and the hoodooed aborigine are both God's creatures, though small indeed their conceptions of infinite love. A wee child toddling in a wonder world, I prefer to their dogmas my excursions into the natural gardens where the voice of the Great Spirit is heard in the twittering of birds, the rippling of mighty waters, and the sweet breathing of flowers. If this is paganism, then at present I am pagan. Ooh, I love it! All right, that's enough of that. I just wanted you to see that and salt your oats some more into reading this book, which is online for free at the Internet Archive. The other one, which is William Apis, you've got to log in and borrow, and you can use your school email. Dr. Singingeagle. Or if you want to use your other Gmail account, whatever. I just like to use the school email because it's safer, I guess, and it's going slow. It's buffering. Dang it, I hate it when it does that. There we go. So, I'm not going to read for you now because I just want to show how it works. And you can click borrow, because if you don't, it's just going to show you a bunch of blank pages. See? Limited preview. Click borrow. And then you got a buffer, and it takes a while. But it will actually let you read all 438 pages. Ta-da! And if you let this sit too long, it says renews automatically with continued use. But if you let it sit too long, it will return by itself. You can click on this to zoom in and read close. And you can read William Apis's work. This is supposed to be his complete works, if I remember correctly. Again, it's at the Internet Archive. On our own ground, the complete writings of William Apis, a Pequot. Edited with an introduction by Barry O'Connell, University of Massachusetts Press. One reason why I keep tripping over my tongue is because I just got back from the dentist. And I'm going to return this. And my voice is a mess. And I keep biting my tongue when I'm talking. So we're going to get off of that. So that's some excerpts I wanted to share with you. Now I need to share with you something from our book, which is Why Indigenous Literatures Matter, page 2. Daniel Heath Justice. It says here that there is a problem. Remember, this is an editor, Daniel Heath Justice, and he's talking in his introduction and his preface about Native literature and the non-natives' attitude towards us. One of the attitudes is indigenous deficiency, that Indians are always less than, that they're always screwing up, and they're going to continue to screw up. Let me read a little bit of what he says here. There it is. He's talking about stories. The stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, the stories non-indigenous tell about us, and stories we tell to non-indigenous. But now we're looking at the stories that non-indigenous tell about us, and that's where we come into indigenous deficiency. There are many stories about indigenous peoples alive in the world today. Some of these stories are our own. They give shape, substance, and purpose to our existence and help us to understand how to uphold our responsibilities to one another and the rest of creation, especially in places and times so deeply affected by colonial fragmentation. Sometimes they're in our indigenous mother tongues. Sometimes they're in English or Spanish or French or other colonial languages. But they're still our good stories, not always happy, not always gentle, but good ones nonetheless, because they tell the truths of our presence in the world today, and days past, and days to come. Other stories are not so good. These are imposed upon us from outside. That's etic. Remember I told you that word? E-T-I-C. From the outside, looking in. These are imposed upon us from outside. They belong to the colonizing populations that claim and dominate our homelands. Populations from which many of us are also descended, and with which we must navigate our complex relations as well. These stories are sometimes told with good intent. More often, they're not. Sometimes they're incomplete rather than wrong, partial rather than pernicious. But sometimes the stories are obnoxious, bad medicine. Even when told with the best of motivations, they can't help but poison both the speaker and the listener. Ooh, those are some good words. I love it. Wow, Daniel Heath Justice. I hope I could see him at the book festival. Let's keep going. Many of the stories about indigenous peoples are toxic, and to my mind, the most corrosive of all is the story of indigenous deficiency. We've all heard this story in one form or another. According to this story, indigenous peoples are in a state of constant lacking in morals and laws, culture, restraint, language, ambition, hygiene, desire, love. This story presumes that we're all broken by addiction or dangerously promiscuous according to pleasure-hating, puritanical concepts of bodily propriety. It insists that we have a lack of responsibility, lack of self-control, lack of dignity. It claims that we can't take care of our children or families or selves because of constitutional absences in our character or biology or intellect. And it goes even further. Rather than see lower life expectancy, unemployment, education rates, and higher rates of homelessness, substance abuse, and suicide as being rooted in generations of sustained and intentional colonial assaults on all aspects of our lives and identities, we're blamed for our supposed lack of basic human decency. Man, I love the way this man writes. Like I said, normally we don't like it when teachers read to the students, but sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. There's our word, indigenous deficiency. if we're going to boil all that down into a nice little definition, we have it's disempowering patterns of thought, language, and practice that represent Native peoples in terms of failure, that key word. Discourse that places responsibility for problems with affected communities while overlooking the larger socioeconomic structures in which they are embedded. Blaming the victim. Blaming the poor. This is an ancient technique that dates back even to Calvinism and even before Calvinism. The Europeans were really good at this, looking down on poor people and thinking that they must have done something to deserve their poverty. That mentality exists in the United States and Canada today. And I'm starting to preach. Let's go on. We're going to look at something that Professor Dumars Harvey Duhuawei, who is Dakota, he calls generational trauma. I believe Daniel Heath Justice mentioned or touched on it a little bit. It says here, generational trauma is the transmission of traumatic experiences from one generation to subsequent generations, resulting in lasting psychological, physiological, and social effects. Let's look at it another way. It's almost like the trauma that our people have gone through gets written into our DNA, almost. Maybe it does. And it goes on generation after generation, which is why you get a lot of us people who are constant screw-ups. What often happens, and I'm guilty of this myself, family members are guilty of this. I've got cousins who do this. They'll screw up over and over. Sherman Alexie writes about it, dramatizes it in his poetry and in his movie. I think it's called Smoke Signals or something like that, where some native will get this close to success and suddenly walk away. I don't know why we do it, but we do. And we do all kinds of self-destructive things. Well, Dumars says it comes from generational trauma, where we are self-destructive because of this trauma that happened to our ancestors, got written into our DNA, and we're still trying to shrug it off. All right, and there's a little bit of self-hatred that gets involved in that too, but I'm talking too much. Another person I want to highlight is Adrian Lewis, who is a Paiute. And if you Google or YouTube a fellow named Andy Rooney, Andy Rooney was a curmudgeon. I don't know if he's still alive. He used to be on the tail end of a show called 60 Minutes. Remember that show? Maybe you guys are too young. It was a show with a clicking stopwatch called 60 Minutes, and it'd be news articles looked at in depth. And then at the end of the show, 30 minutes or an hour long, they'd bring in this weird, grumpy old man named Andy Rooney, and he was supposed to be a comedian or a humorist, but he usually said irritating and offensive and grumpy things about things that he hates, or why he's sick of this and why he doesn't like that. One of the things he mentioned was a critique about Native peoples. Let me see if I can read it. This is from the preface of Old Shirts in New Skins by Sherman Alexie. It's kind of a rare book nowadays. It's hard to find this book. I got lucky. This foreword is written by Adrian Lewis. Let's see if I can find it. While American Indians have a grand past, their impact on the culture of the world has been slight. There are no great American Indian novels, no poetry, no memorable music. Their totem pole does not rank with the statuary of Greece, and there is no American Indian art except for some good craft works in wool, pottery, and silver. This is actually a quote from Andy Rooney. in 60 minutes. And I should read it with Andy Rooney's weird, whiny, irritating voice.
While American Indians have a grand past, their impact on the culture of the world has been slight.
Never mind, it's too irritating. I'm not going to read any more of that. So let's go on to what Adrian Lewis says about this. Not long ago, Andy Rooney, the aging, self-appointed humorist of the television program 60 Minutes, wrote these deprecating and racist words in his nationally syndicated column. While the words from this potato-headed pontiff may seem off the wall and innocuous to some, they drew the ire of Indian people across the country. Perhaps Rooney, in the steel concrete valleys of Manhattan, had never heard of the brilliant Indian poets who are writing today, like Joy Harjo, Lucy Tapahanso, and Simon Ortiz. I don't think I could name but a few Irish American poets, but I find it hard to believe that he has never heard of the novelists Darcy McNichol, Scott Momaday, James Welch, Louise Erdrich, and so on. The point I want to make of this is that Indian people are still a largely invisible race. For most Americans, we are perceived to be extinct, or something distant and related to the sometimes romantic, sometimes halting caricatures on the silver screen. The truth is, sadly, that very few of our Indian writers speak to the condition of the majority of our Indian people. There is only a small handful of writers who speak directly to those Indians living in Indian communities on Indian land, the enrolled members of federally recognized tribes. It is not my intent here to replicate the litany of oppressed whining that we often fall into, but to make concrete who and what we are as Indians. For the most part, we are a disenfranchised people whose lands, cultures, and very voices have been stolen, used, and abused. A good many of us are as dependent now on federal handouts for our very survival as we were when we first were caged in reservations in the late 19th century. We seem to burn furiously towards our own self-destruction, and yet we survive. We will always survive. And he talks about the bright spot being writers, these new writers such as Sherman Alexie, and this was written back in the 90s when Alexie and I used to hang out, and Alexie was rather young, and so was I. But never mind, not enough of me. He goes on to talk about something which I call and which he calls cultural illiteracy, which we can define as a lack of knowledge or understanding, and I highlight, underline, whether willful or unwillful, of other cultures, including the history, the politics, values, and social norms of those cultures. Let's read it again. Cultural illiteracy is a lack of knowledge or understanding, whether willful or unwillful, of other cultures, including history, politics, values, and social norms. We here in North America, and even a lot of Europeans, are very guilty of that. Are we not? Yes, we are. Look at how we're treating China right now. China, a country which has never invaded another country in its 5,000-year history. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act here in the United States, and up in Canada they had another act. I forgot what they used to call it, but this is back in the 1800s and 1900s, the early 1900s, where there's sinophobia, S-I-N-O, sinophobia. You know how to spell that. Phobia, P-H-O-B-I-A. The fear of Chinese people, the fear of Asians. It comes from cultural illiteracy. We have a certain person in the White House who will remain nameless right now, who's always talking about China, China, China. Never mind. It's all related to cultural illiteracy. the fear, the xenophobia that is involved. It's related. Now, the last thing I'm going to torture you with for this, I probably am going to speak for 30 freaking minutes, but I got to hurry up and get this done. This is another key term we need to know. Comparative misfortune. This is the flip side. Because remember, we natives, my grandmother used to say, nobody can bicker like an Indian can. What is that all about? Hang on while I have some tea. Nobody can bicker like an Indian can. And remember, we are runaway band Potawatomi Indians. Open! There we go. Yummy. I love tea. Well, one of the things that they used to do back in the 80s and early 90s, and all the way up to the 2000s, I don't know if we still do this to each other as much as we used to. Comparative misfortune is playing more Indian than thou and using misfortune to show how, look at that dude. He's got on a Rolex watch and he's an Indian. Or maybe not, maybe it's a citizen watch. So he probably has never seen a rough day in his life. He's not a real Indian. Let's read. Comparative misfortune is the act of judging the poor circumstances of others against one's own, usually to one up another's misfortune or to exclude that person from a perceived group. That's a terrible, convoluted definition. I like my dumb little example better. Oftentimes we play more Indian than thou by using our own misfortune against other Indians. We do this too much. I don't know, like I said before, if it's still a thing in the 2020s, but it was a thing back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s where, let's say I went to a powwow and I got a new, what do you call those, turquoise silver band, and I'm wearing it and all proud of my band, and some other person who's probably drunk, and I'm cruising along through the Rosebud Res or something, I don't know, and I pick him up, he's hitchhiking, and he's looking at me like, look at you all uppity Indian. You ain't a real Indian anymore. Tell you another story. Sorry about the me, I stuff. Back when I was going to USD, University of South Dakota, you know, you've seen me wear my chokers all the time. And I had just gotten back from Taiwan. I taught for Taiwan for 10 years. Now I'm going back to get my second PhD in English, Native American literature emphasis. And I'm gone to school, and there was a couple other, not a whole lot of Indians, but there were a few of us. And I don't know if I was the treasurer or secretary of the American Indian Student Association. And we were all hanging out and having fry bread and wojapi and just chilling. And one girl was looking at me and making fun of me. She said, how come you are always wearing that made in Taiwan choker? And I looked at her and said, how'd you know I made this while I was living in Taiwan? And she went, Never mind. But again, comparative misfortune, where you criticize fellow Indians by saying they're better, they have it better than you, so that way they must be softer than you, and they're not real Indians. All right, now we're going to go to our homework. Continue to read Why Indigenous Literatures Matter, pages 33 to 70. And please remind me to tell you the story of the real people. I might actually have it already on e-learning. I could pull it up and move that video closer to make it current, best way to say it. Matter of fact, how are we doing on time? 39 minutes! I'll show you what I'm talking about really quick. There's a story where it's called The Real People and Coyote's Super Glue. Nah, it's going to take too long. There it is right there. Coyote super glue. Ta-da! This is from last semester. And you can see a picture of Coyote. I had AI draw this. And you could tell it was cold. I'm wearing a sweater. And Coyote's got his super glue right there. So I'll move that up to make it current to fall 2025 and move it up to the green section because we're going to talk about it. So thank you so much. It's 40 minutes and 22 seconds. I already talked way too long. You guys have an awesome rest of the day. Talk to you later.